Welcome to the Lowdown Podcast, the show where we dive deep into the topics that directly impact the evolving originator. Now, I'm your host, Connor Bartley, bam! And today I've got Josiah Byrds joining me. Josiah is a 20-year veteran of corporate America. He's not from the mortgage space, and he ran sales organizations of up to 5,000 people in the telecom world and represents the kind of fresh thought that I'm seeing more and more of in the industry. Now, Josiah, thanks for joining me. I'm really
Yeah, of course, man.
I'm looking forward to this conversation because when we spoke last, we talked a lot in great detail about this evolving relationship between loan officers and realtors and how it can't just be about answering your phone and being available on the weekends and closing on time. You know, that's the price of admission these days, and you and your team are going well beyond that, and it's just awesome to hear. But before we dive into that, just for context for the listeners, can you share a little bit about your background and kind of where you're coming from and how you got into this business?
Yeah, of course, man. Thanks for having me on. Love your content. Love the voice that I think you provide our industry, and just kind of giving loan originators this really safe space to collaborate across company lines, challenge each other, get better. We need way more of that. Like for us as an industry to evolve and get better, we've got to be able to challenge each other. You know, I encourage my guys all the time. Several of my guys they have small breakfast groups that they do with other loan officers in the Atlanta market, and they all work at different companies. But when those guys show up, it's about challenging each other, getting better, accountability. I love that. I love those types of safe spaces.
Yeah,
Kudos to what you're doing in our industry. No, so a little bit about me. You hit the nail on the head. So spent 20 years working for T-Mobile, actually, telecom space. Selling those little iPhones, pushing them and wherever we could. But it was great. I don't regret it. I learned so much, right? Talk about the repetitions that you get leading people, leading organizations, building and working within structured environments, and creating systems and processes. A lot of things that the muscle memory as I've come into mortgage, I'm like, wow, like learning those skill sets, how it was crazy how quickly they translated. But what brought me to mortgage, so very fortunate, longtime mentor of mine, actually my brother-in-law, and he's been in the mortgage space for over 20 years. His name's Christian Stockoff, ran, 1,200 employee direct lender, built a broker from the ground up that got up to, $1 billion funded, in 2012, 2013. Just a wealth of experience. Actually, over 20,000 loans closed himself as an individual loan officer. He was when in his heyday. He's quick to remind me. In his heyday, he used to crank 100, 120 units a month with his team. But no, so great. Really influential mentor in my life. And similarly, his 20-year mortgage career took place after a long career with Chrysler, actually, in corporate America. And so, I still remember vividly him and I having a conversation back 2020, 2021. And he was talking about, what we all know, the big refi boom and what that looked like. But for him and me at that time, we started talking about now, like the industry where it's at now. And having been through, 2008 and obviously different circumstances, but the huge pullback in production levels, he knew right then and there. He said, "Hey, like the music's going to stop. The party's going to come to an end. We, as an economy, we constantly get over our skis. We do this every 5 to 7 years, and we've got to have a reset." He's like, and when the music stops, there's going to be a lot of consolidation. There's going to be a lot of mergers, a lot of acquisitions. A lot of loan officers are going to leave the industry, and there's going to be a massive opportunity to grab market share. So this is back in 2021, we started putting plans together for, what happened when the music stopped, right? And so, I got licensed, came over early 2022, and we got to work right away. Stripping, Anchor Home Mortgage, our brokerage, stripping it back down, getting the right technology in place, restructuring ourselves from a fixed cost standpoint, and being ready. We spent most of 2020 doing that. And coincidentally, right when the market got really tough. And so we had kind of put things in place so that we could start growing in 2023. So when most companies started to pull back and do layoffs and do all these different cuts, we had structured ourselves fundamentally to start expanding and growing in 2023 and into 2024. And it's been great, right? We did about a 350% increase in funded volume from 23 to 24, looking to do a 200% increase in 25 over 24. And a large part of that has been because we're just, we've looked at what has worked over time. And as all businesses, like I don't care what the widget is that you sell, you've got to evolve and you've got to stay ahead of the pace.
Yeah. And so
So
what we talked about was this relationship now between the loan
yeah,
officer and the agent, and how you and your team are really approaching that. And it seems like you're doing life with these
yeah.
partners too. So
I'll
tell
tell
us
you,
a little bit about
it was the biggest. I remember when I was at T-Mobile, a lot of the partnerships that I had to maintain were with companies like Best Buy and Apple and Walmart. And I'll tell you what, yeah, if all I did was bring the bare bones, like, hey, I'll answer your phone calls and I'll turn things in on time to you and I'll make sure that we're available. If that's all I did for companies like Apple and Best Buy, like, they've got a door. They'll tell us to not let it hit us on the way out. That was the craziest realization. I remember, it was probably 6 months into the mortgage space, and I'm building my own personal pipeline, right? And so I'm reaching out to realtors, and as I'm setting up meetings and having one-on-ones, I walk into Chris's office and I say verbatim, I said, hey, is the basic expectation that a loan officer is expected to hit to just answer their phone, be available on the weekends, and turn around pre-approvals and close on time? Like, is that it? And just kind of chuckles. He goes, yeah, welcome to the mortgage industry. Like, that's the barrier to entry. I'm like, God, that's like, that's not how you build this business. Right. And so early on, when I started building my relationships, the first thing, that I kind of sat back and said, hey, we've got to focus on engaged partnership. Right. And engaged partnership at the individual realtor level. Because the other thing that struck me is, these companies are spending all of this money on these MSAs, right? And these big marketing agreements with brokers. And we're in a day and age where the buyer is more informed than ever before, right? Most buyers are checking out 200 homes online, thanks to Zillow and Redfin and Realtor.com before they even talk to a realtor. And so the realtors that are being successful because of their team, right? The attorneys that they partner with, the loan officers they partner with, the inspectors they partner with. What I found is the commonalities between the best performing realtors and the average realtors. The best performing realtors understood that their team had to fill their needs, not whatever filled the brokerage's needs, had to fill their individual needs. And so what I started to do is say, okay, let me go find those realtors. Let me go find these realtors that want an engaged level of partnership, that are okay with accountability that goes both ways, right? And it starts with asking them. It's just three very simple questions, right? What are you working on? What are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? What scares you? What gets in the way? What do you think could prevent you from hitting those goals? And then how can I help you make those obstacles no longer as scary or remove them altogether, right? And actually sitting down with realtors, having these conversations and diving into their business, right? And challenging them. It's okay if it's a true partnership, it's okay to challenge your partners and say, hey, is that really the marketing format that you want to do? Direct, do you really want to canvas this neighborhood with direct mail once every 12 months? Like, let's take a step back and think about like a cadence and a strategy to this, right?
so
Talking about social media, but just getting into their business and diving into it and saying, what do you need to go be successful? And let me provide that to you.
so what do you feel like keeps someone from asking those questions, because it feels pretty obvious?
Yeah.
Is it an imposter syndrome? Is it you don't have enough knowledge of what to recommend to someone that might keep you from saying those things? Or I'm just curious, like, where do you feel is
Yeah.
the hang up some?
I mean, I think it's a couple of things, right? I think as an industry, I've talked to a lot of loan officers that have, I mean, there's not a there's not a way to sugarcoat it, have just kind of gotten lazy, right? Like if you go back to 2017, 18, 19, I talked to loan officers that were active and doing well in those time periods. They did ask realtors these questions. They were out there hitting, open houses. There wasn't this artificial fear that if I'm not the fastest, this realtor is just going to go somewhere else, right? And they were okay saying no to relationships that didn't make sense for you as a loan officer, right? It was run like a business. I think what we saw from 2020 and 2021, just the sheer volume of what happened, everyone's just trying to keep up with the fire hose, right? And so there's some muscles that we just haven't really flexed as an industry. And if you go back, you talk to loan officers that have been doing this since before pandemic, they talked about like sitting down once a month and having one-on-ones with their realtor partners, where you're breaking down your funnel, you're breaking down your pipeline, you're updating where certain borrowers are at, you're talking about where you're canvassing leads from, you're talking about networking opportunities. Like you were diving into this stuff with your realtor partners. I think that because there was just so much volume, the prevailing thought for a lot of loan officers was, all right, I need to go just get like, let me have 50 or 60 or 70 realtors and let me get like one transaction from each of them. And you're not setting yourself up to have a very engaged relationship and partnership when that happens. And I think, it feels safer. You're like, all right, I've got, 50 referral sources. Well, do you really have 50 referral sources?
Right.
Probably not, right? You're just a name on a list and you're getting lucky more than you're controlling, your destiny.
So, because what we're talking about in these engaged partnerships, does it feel like a certain level of vulnerability is required for that? Because what you're
Yeah.
suggesting is, the loan officer be pretty bold, and we're calling stuff out back and forth, and it's a two-way street. But at the same time, I think it's important to remember that everyone really is just trying to do the best they can. So we got to stop pretending that we know it all and be willing to have those vulnerable conversations with our partners to say, "Hey, help me out on this," or, "What do you think?"
Yeah.
And so, like, how has that played out for you?
I mean, it's been welcomed, I think, with open arms by, both loan officers and, realtors. Realtors want it, right? Because I think it's the other piece of it. Like, as I've talked to more and more realtors, like how much coaching do they really get in-house from their brokerages, right? Just the way that model is set up, right? They're all 1099 contracted employees. And for a lot of brokerages, the prevailing thought is how many licenses can I hang here? And then, there's not a lot of overhead expense that a broker takes on for a realtor. So it's like, hey, go figure it out. And so what I've found, and this has kind of been for the loan office, the LOs on my team, once they get over the hump and they start to open up and be willing to have these conversations, they realize how receptive their realtor partners have actually been. And that's been the overwhelming feedback I've heard from realtors is like, thank you. Like, thank you for digging in because, where you have a lot of relationships, you have both loan officers and realtors that are just kind of like, trying to put this front on that they're experts. And, but I love that word vulnerable, right? When we're vulnerable with each other and we're asking, questions, asking, hey, why did you do this? What's going on? Sometimes even with clients, right? Like I know with some of my realtor partners, if they send me a referral and I talk to them and for whatever reason it just doesn't click, like I'll ask my realtor partner, like, hey, is there like, give me some feedback, right? Like what could I have done differently to, meet that client where they, were in a place that would have led to them, working with me. And when you put that vulnerability out there to a realtor, you're going to find that you get it back from them, right? I just had a call from one of my realtors today. We've been working on the client and she's putting the offer together. She calls me. She's like, hey, like, I need your help. I'm like, yeah, what's going on? She's like, I think I lost the client. Like, I think I pissed her off. I'm like, okay, like fill me in. Like what happened? So she's going through everything and I guess the client had her own attorney that's reviewing the terms and was like, wanting her to do like a 21-day due diligence. And as a realtor, she's like, hey, that's like, we're not going to be very competitive. And so there was, they had a miscommunication, but because of the relationship that I've built with this realtor, she felt comfortable to come to me and say, hey, like, here's what happened. Think about that for a second. I'm her loan officer.
Right.
She didn't call her broker. right?
Yeah.
She didn't call her broker. She didn't call another realtor. She called me and she said, "Hey, here's what happened. Here's what I said. Let me know what could I have done differently." And then ultimately ended up, she's like, "Hey, can you give the client a call and like see if you can, come in and save, kind of save the day." But that started with early in our relationship. I was vulnerable with her, right? Like I'm an open book with my realtor partners, and it creates a safe environment that encourages them to be the same. And when you find you've got that level of engagement, right? Like it's an interesting spot to be when your realtor partners are calling you for advice and feedback on their business before their broker or before other realtors. Like you're a business partner,
Right.
right? And you're working with them, you're building their business. And here's the interesting thing I would tell for every loan officer out there, and I'll go into this in a second because there's a science that we use with every loan officer on what their book of business should look like from a referral partner, and there's
Sure.
data behind it that we use.
Okay.
And what I always tell them is, an A-level realtor, right? Which I define those partnerships by activity, not by productivity, but by activity. So for me, an A-level realtor is any realtor or referral partner that you can, set your watch by one referral a week. You know that somebody that's going to send you a new person every week, like clockwork, at least to work with, right? When I tell my LOs, I'm like, do you know how hard it is to unseat an A-level realtor from their existing relationships?
Yeah.
Because if they're generating one referral a week to give out to their business partner, there's probably a really rock solid relationship there. Like I joke with them, I'm like, good luck. Like I challenge you to call one of my realtor partners that's an A-level partner and unseat them from me. You won't. Because and what I told them is the reason why is I've been with them since they were B and C level partners, where their business was at a place where they could not generate one referral every week. It was maybe one referral a month or two referrals a month. And by being with them and engaging into their business and figuring out how to help them get better and partnering with them, and helping them get from, one or two clients a month to 5 or 6 clients a month. Like when you're the partner, when you're the ride or die partner that is with them as the tide raises, they're not going anywhere. And
So,
so,
what are some of the things that you're finding that those agents are valuing the most that you're bringing to the table, coaching wise? What are some of
yeah,
the most valued topics to bring up or to help them out with?
yeah, I think that, one of the biggest ones is for some people it's scary, but, selling into your own database, right? How do you monetize your own personal database? I think it's scary for loan officers and it is scary for realtors. I talk to realtors and loan officers like talking to a lead is almost more comfortable, which blows my mind, right? Like I'd rather always deal with my friends and family. But
Right.
for a lot of folks, talking to a lead is more comfortable than friends and family. And I think it's a vulnerability issue, right? With your friends and family, you feel like you got to be perfect,
Right.
right? Because they know you, right? You can't afford to screw up. With a cold call or a cold lead, it's like, they don't know you from Adam, right? And so a lot of times what's interesting is I find realtors and loan officers both that are almost weary of like selling, or not selling, selling's the wrong word, but being available to their friends and family to do your job, which again is crazy to me. Probably 20% of my book of business comes off of my personal database,
Yeah.
right?
So
And
many
so,
miss that opportunity, right?
yeah.
They it's transactional. They
And
hunt. They
so,
never farm.
yeah, part of it is just honestly teaching and training realtors in how to have those conversations with their database. And it's crazy. And like I have this conversation with realtors, like I will, with my loan officers, I'll tell them, I will train your realtors on this all the time because there's a psychology behind it, right? There's the same 3 questions, right? Think about this. Anybody in your personal database that you've gone more than, let's call it 30 days since your last conversation, right? The number of people that we talk to on a regular basis every 30 days, it's a pretty small number, right? Most of the people, probably 60, 70% of your database, you'll go, more than 30 days when you talk to them. And when you catch up with that person, it's the same 3 questions every time. How are you? How's your family? How's work? Right? And so when I talk to our realtor partners about, I'm like, hey, you get to control that conversation. All right. And that's an organic conversation. But what also happens is that the psychology of how, our society works, if I ask you, Connor, how's your family? And you tell me, reciprocity has already told your brain that you feel you're inclined to return the question to me, right? Hey, my family's great. Here's what's going on. How's yours?
How are you
Right?
doing? Yeah.
And so what I tell our realtor partners, I'm like, this is how these conversations go into your database. You're just calling your database and you're catching up and you're asking them how they are, and they're going to ask you the same. And you're asking them how their family is, and they're going to ask you the same. And then you're asking them how work is and what they've been up to. I go, and then this amazing thing happens. They then give you the platform to talk about you being a realtor. And now you get to talk about what you do and why you're passionate about it and not come off as salesy, because this happened as a natural evolution of the conversation. And you get to talk about, I'm so blessed. I get to serve people every day. I get to do what I love. And then when I tell all of our partners, I say, hey, but then there's a very important sentence you've got to insert in there. After you tell them, first of all, it's always positive, right? Like, you're negative. You don't ever be negative, because that just makes people uncomfortable, right? So you talk about how fortunate you feel and how blessed you feel to do what you do. And then you've got to make sure that you stop and say, but hey, I want to be very clear on something, right? So if I was having this conversation with you, I tell you how busy we are at Anchor Home Mortgage, I would finish it with, hey, Connor, I want to be really clear. I'm never too busy to help you or anybody that you send my way, because, you're a great friend. I just want you to know that you or anybody that you ever send my way, they're always going to get the red carpet, because you're part of the club,
Call out. That's a
right?
great call
And
out. Yeah.
you got to use those words. And all we're doing is, again, we're tapping into the exact same things. Like, there's a reason that people love their Delta SkyMiles, right? And why people love their Marriott rewards. Like, our society loves being part of some club that gives us exclusivity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's all you're doing, right?
All that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, all you're doing is you're letting your personal friends and family, your personal database know, hey, you're in a special club. You're in a special club that has access to me and my team, and we're very good at what we do, and I'm always going to make time for you. And that's all the conversation is. And so what I tell realtors, I go, does that sound, and I'll role play this with a realtor. I'll say, does that sound salesy? I'm like, no, that was really supernatural. I'm like, okay, cool. Now make a schedule and literally cycle through all of the people in your database. And I go, that's prospecting. I go, and they go, really? And like, oh my God, that's selling. That's prospecting. And then, it's the same thing we do with our loan officers too. I tell all of our loan officers the same thing. I go, that's prospecting 101. And the loan officer piece of that, we layer in some additional things of asking your friends and family, like, hey, you could help me. Don't ever ask for favors. Favors are optional. When you ask people for help, that's like a non-negotiable. And again, these are just little word changes, right? And asking, hey, what you could help me with is, if you know anybody that's a real estate agent that you think could benefit from my helping them, I'd love to make the connection.
Right.
Right. And so
I'll add one thing to that. So I read this morning. Ask for advice instead of asking for an opinion. Advice is teamwork. It involves them. Opinion is very individual, and it's from the outside looking in. So yeah, I love that you're creating this sense of unity and we-ness with the agent and coaching.
Advice and feedback. Feedback is one that I love, because you're asking them to make you better, which creates a safe space for you. I've got to ask you for feedback to earn the right for me to give you feedback, right? Because it's got to be a two-way street.
Yeah, and now they're more invested in your success because you're going to follow their advice or feedback, and so they want to see you win because they're a part of it, right? So it's a small, very small change, but it does make a huge
big
impact.
Returns, right?
Anyway, man, let's wrap this up. I really appreciate this conversation, what you're doing. To sum it up, it sounds like really what you've taken is an approach where you've recognized that there's a gap in the coaching of an agent, and you're filling that gap and then bringing exceptional value to that relationship, taking them from a moment in time where they're doing less business and building them up to where they're doing more, and in the process really building a ton of loyalty and within that relationship, which will ultimately serve you long term and beyond. And so I think it's very smart what you're doing, and I love the shift and the way that you're approaching those relationships. Is there, before we wrap up, is there any singular piece of advice or anything else that you could share with the lowdown listeners that
Yeah.
might be useful?
I think that the biggest thing I would leave with is, as a loan officer, you've got to understand that at the end of the day, there's really two fundamental things that a realtor, it really matters to them. And number one is going to be who is going to get their clients, the best experience and the best product into the closing table on time every time, right? So that experience for their clients. And as a loan officer, a lot of that depends on where you're at, right? So make sure, and you talk a lot about this, right? Make sure you're set up somewhere organizationally where that's going to be great, because the reality is, a loan officer, a lot of that is kind of outside of your control, right? Your operations team is going to have a lot of control over that first thing. The second thing that every realtor really cares about is who do they enjoy working with? Because let's be really honest here. There are very few transactions in life that can be as stressful. Even the smooth ones are as stressful as buying a home, right? We're in this business and think about anytime you've done anything with a house or a refinance, like, how the process goes, and there's still a little bit of like an anxiety that you have as you go through it. So, and our clients go through this a couple times a year. So your realtor partners, that's what they're going to care about. Who's going to take care of my business, which largely depends as a loan officer where you hang your license. But then the second is, who do I enjoy working with? And that is what you will always have control over as a loan officer, right? You control being somebody, be an uplifter in the relationship, be someone, if I'm going to go to the gym and I got to get in better shape, I'm going to go and have a workout partner that's going to be uplifting to me and is going to be there with me and is going to challenge me. If I have a workout partner that isn't, willing to do the same things I'm doing and roll my sleeves up, I'm not going to be challenged, right? And so it's the same thing in that dynamic between real estate agents and loan officers. Be someone that your realtor partner can depend on because you make them better. Not just because you show up, but because you challenge them and you make them better. And be open to the vulnerability that creates, and understand that if you do that, you're going to create deeper, longer lasting relationships with your realtor partners, to where you actually can go do something fun and great. And you're not always playing defense and, scared that somebody's going to swoop in and steal your referral partner.
Love that, man. Well, Josiah, thanks for joining. I
Yeah.
really appreciate the conversation. Tons of great value.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right, man. Take care.